This is me. I'm Hattie Webb. I'm a sustainability consultant at Action Sustainability. So I work for the same company as the UK Supply Chain Sustainability School. You can probably tell by my accent. I am based in London, but I will be delivering this session for you today, all about sustainability strategy for small businesses. So I hope you learn something. I hope you find it useful. Please do use the chat function on Zoom. If you have any questions as we go, please do feel free to ask, and I'll do my very best to answer them. Okay, what are we going to be covering? We're going to be looking at what a sustainability strategy is, the terminology associated with a strategy, how to develop a sustainability strategy for small businesses, and also how to deliver a strategy as well. My background is in carbon and sustainability strategy, so I deliver strategies for our clients as part of my consultancy work. So it's great to be able to do these sessions and also bring in kind of my experience of working with smaller businesses as well, and how they've managed to develop and put together a strategy, given the fact that small businesses have less resources, maybe less time to be able to dedicate to sustainability. Okay, and the agenda. Oh, I know it's earlier in the morning for you, but it's towards the end of my day, so you can tell probably with my brain getting a little bit tired. But the agenda that we're going to be following for this session follows what we call our strategy cycle. So I'm going to be taking you through this strategy cycle, the key steps to developing a strategy. Well, we have the developing side at the top, and then we have the delivering side there at the bottom. So I'll be taking you through research, drivers, goals and commitments, creating an action plan, monitoring implementation, measuring, managing, and reporting on your performance, and then also continually improving as well. So let's start with what is sustainability. I appreciate we're all coming into this with different levels of knowledge. But essentially, sustainability is these three pillars or these three themes: the environment, the society, and the economy. These can also be called the three Ps: people, planet, profit, and are often referred to as the triple bottom line in business. So, environmental considerations relate to our impact on nature, including pollution, use of energy, and carbon emissions, as well as use of materials and waste, water availability, and biodiversity. Societal considerations concern human elements like community, culture, equality, access to fair employment and training and health. And then economic considerations are related to an organization's long term financial sustainability, including ethical business practices, stakeholder relationships, governance, and transparency. This is all about generating wealth and economic stability without impacting the environment. And all three of these things are dependent on each other, and they are important to consider. When we're developing our strategies and plans as a business, we need to be thinking about how best to balance these considerations, meeting that sustainable sweet spot that's in the middle, as you can see there. This simply means that we must balance environmental, economic, and social impacts in a way that doesn't impact future generations being able to meet their own needs. So, for example, if we're looking to move to more renewable energy, we need to be cautious of the knock on impacts of that. Renewable energy typically uses lithium ion batteries to store the energy, which is typically made using cobalt. And 60% of the world's supply of cobalt comes from the Democratic Republic of Congo, where often there's poor labor, there's modern slavery, and child labor as well. So, my computer just froze. I think we're back, but I'm just checking that I am still here and Zoom is still working. Yes,
You
we're all
are
good. Great. Thank you, Alice. Cool. Okay, you might have heard of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, or the SDGs. These are 17 interrelated goals set by the United Nations. and they are goals that need to be achieved by 2030. And as you can see, they cover a broad range of sustainability issues applicable to any organization of any size. So these are typically used as a framework for organizations to structure their strategy because they cover all three pillars. And so they're universal, they're easily recognized and understood. So if you're relatively new to sustainability and you're not sure where to start, this is a great first reference. And another kind of key element to be aware of. Sorry, my laptop is saying it's going to reboot, and I'm telling it not to. Can tell that it's getting to the end of the day, and my laptop is getting tired. Apologies. Okay. Uh, Back to my slide. Another key element that's really important to understand before you develop your strategy is the business benefits, as this will likely be considered as some of your drivers as well, which I'll come into a bit more detail. So it's really important that you understand the business benefits when you're communicating why you need a sustainability strategy to internal stakeholders, because you need to be able to get everyone invested. A sustainability strategy really is as only effective as the people behind it. So you need to ensure that people understand the benefits of having it. Now, there are numerous benefits, but a couple to point out here. The first being compliance regulations. We're seeing more and more of this coming out globally, which is really driving the need for organizations to implement a strategy. We're also seeing more and more client requirements on sustainability, maybe being requested in tenders or needing to be demonstrated when working on projects. So that's the context, but let's have a look at um, kind of what you need to know when with regards to putting a sustainability strategy together, and around the kind of the language around strategies and policies, because it's important that we know this and we're all kind of using the same terminology before we go around or we go about actually putting a strategy together. So, when we refer to a sustainability strategy, we mean a document that outlines your organization's plan of action to achieve your sustainability mission and objectives. So, simply what that means is, what are your sustainability impacts and how are you managing them, including who's managing them, what's your time frame for managing them. And this all links back to making sure that your strategy is tailored to you and your organization. So you really need to think about what's relevant to your specific organization. And this will depend, as your sustainability impacts might be different to other organizations based on your industry, based on the goods you're procuring, or even your size. So you may kind of notice that for some organizations they have a sustainability strategy, but they also have other strategies as well, such as a carbon strategy, a procurement strategy, or a social value framework. So all of these different strategies tend to fit into the wider context of sustainability strategy and often provide more detail than what might be included in the sustainability strategy. So keep this in mind, as when you come to that research stage when developing your strategy, you might find that a particular client you're working with has a range of strategies. So it's good to understand what strategies they have when you're developing your own. Again, focusing a little bit more on the terminology here. And I'll just kind of go through some of these words so that we're really clear what they mean, especially when I'm bringing them into the rest of the session. It's important that we know what they actually mean. So let's start with mission and vision. When we refer to an organization's vision, we're talking about where you want to be, so what you want to achieve and what your end goal is. So, for example, you might say that you want to be the most sustainable civil engineering company. That's your vision. However, your mission is, how do you get to your vision? So, what do you need to do to achieve this, and what objectives do you need in place to help you achieve this? So, a mission statement focuses on today and what your organization does to achieve it, whilst the mission statement focuses on tomorrow and what your organization wants to become. If we move on to sustainability policy in red there, this is fundamentally what you're doing internally to achieve your sustainability goals and commitments. We've then got our goals and commitments. So a goal is the long-term outcome that you want to achieve. The commitments are what you're committing to that will help you achieve your goal. And then we've got targets and objectives here, which are the short-term actions that will help you to achieve your goal. Now these are kind of similar, but they're slightly different in that a target is more precise, so it might be more quantifiable, so it might have a number, so reduce water usage by 15% in 1 year. Objectives are detailed accountable steps towards achieving the goal that you've set. So an example of an objective might be implement water saving technologies in all facilities. So hopefully that gives you a good summarization of some of the terminology here and that you see commonly used with regards to sustainability strategies. And here I just wanted to more clearly highlight the difference between a strategy and a policy. So, your strategy is going to be the overall framework that you have. So, it includes your vision, your mission, any goals that you've got, any objectives and targets. It's your plan of action for delivering all of the above. So, what do you need to do to actually, drive those business processes to deliver against your goals and targets? The strategy is often long term. So, we typically see organizations deliver strategies to 2030, 2040, and even up to 2050. So it's very much dealing with your external factors also. So, what are your sustainability impacts and how do you manage them? Whereas your policy, it sits within your strategy. So it's your principles of actions, it's the set of rules for rational decision making, and it's the breakdown of what you're committing to within your strategy and how you'll go about achieving that. So, whilst you might see examples of policies externally, it's common for these to be online. It's actually an internal process. So, it's what you're committing to internally, what you're doing on a day to day basis. So those are the key differences there between a strategy and a policy because often they can get a little bit confused. Okay, let's have a look back at our strategy cycle. I can see that a couple of people have joined since I started. Don't worry, you haven't missed much, just the introduction. And I'm going to be taking us through this strategy cycle. So this will form the agenda for the next part of the session that I'm going to be taking us through. So, first of all, research. Now, there are many different ways that you can do this research, but one of the methods that we use to assess an organization is to do what we call a benchmarking exercise. So, we look to see if organizations have certain criteria. For example, do they have a strategy? Do they have a policy? Do they have targets and objectives? What sustainability topics are they looking at? What are they reporting to most? And based on their maturity for each question, we then award points. And so through this process, we can score each organization, which gives an overall score and allows a comparison to be made. So the key here is to pull out best practice within the industry and look for opportunities to potentially collaborate on different projects or on certain sustainability topics. And this will just give you a really good overview of how you are performing against your clients, your competitors, and where are those gaps. It's essentially a gap analysis, looking at, okay, we might be doing this really well in comparison to our competitors, but actually our competitors or our clients are ahead of us with regard to these elements, and that's where we can focus on and improve our strategy. The second step here is identifying your drivers, impacts, and enablers. So, once you've done your research, you're going to want to consider what your drivers are for wanting to develop a sustainability strategy. So, this relates back to making sure that you have that investment from stakeholders and that your strategy is developed and implemented effectively. This is also the stage where you're going to want to consider your impacts and your enablers for getting your strategy implemented. So the next part is really understanding what is relevant to your business, and this is the tailoring part, the bespoke. And this diagram is actually taken from the Supply Chain Sustainability School. You might recognize it. So we have drivers on the left, topics in the middle, and then enablers on the right. So on the left, these drivers, this is the why. What is driving you both personally and at an organizational level to be more sustainable. So when looking at a strategy, it's more about, what's driving the whole organization, but it's still important that you remember those kind of individual drivers as well, because people will be different, driven by different things, and that's important to bear in mind. So, for one organization, climate change and people might be drivers. For another organization, it might be customers and health and safety. So, it's important to understand what your drivers are, as they will lead you into who you need to engage with and what your priorities should be. Okay, so that middle section, that green section, are the topics. So this is the what. These are 17 topics. So this is kind of working out what is relevant and applicable to your business. So, for example, if you produce a lot of waste, you might want your strategy to be around the use of materials and waste and resource efficiency. You can't cover everything, so you need to decide what's more impactful. Another organization might be using a lot of plant and machinery, so waste might not be as important, but air quality might be. And this is covering the environmental elements as well as social, so modern slavery and diversity as well. And then on the right hand side, we have enablers. So the how. This is what will help you to deliver your strategy. Is it more knowledge on offsite, or is it more knowledge on procurement? And we'll come back to enablers a little bit later on. Just checking that everything is still working on Zoom. Yep, we're all good. Great. And then the drivers. So, although they might be similar between organizations, it's really important that you understand what your specific drivers are, as they will differ. So, this slide here shows these drivers on the left hand side. Um, and you can see that you can choose from different key elements there. And then you can see on the right hand side where they've kind of rated them and based on how much it is driving the organization. And we do this with our clients. So we'll get a group of stakeholders together, maybe sustainability staff or top management, and we'll have this conversation. What is driving you currently? And then we rank each driver on a scale of 1 to 10, and we go through each one. So if you look at that inner light blue line, that's an example of an organization's response. So customer competitive advantage and supply chain security are coming up as key drivers here. So you can use this to shape your strategy. You know you need to engage with your customers. You can also look at it from a future perspective. So will your drivers change? So for example, that purple line there, leadership, organizational ethics, and innovation are coming up as potential drivers for the future. So you can then use this to shape your strategy looking long term. Remember that strategies can be up to 2040. So, thinking, how do we improve ethics? How do we include this in our strategy? So, overall, this is about what is driving your organization. You can also do something to assess your key impacts using a materiality assessment. So this is where you plot these key impacts on the right hand side there against importance to stakeholders and impact. And more organizations are doing something called a double materiality assessment. So looking at the impact that you're having on the outside world, but then also the impact that the outside world is having on you as an organization. So looking at it from that kind of double lens there. Um, but you don't have to do this. It can be a really useful tool for small businesses. They might not have quite the same resources to be able to do this, but it can be a really useful exercise to assess your impact. And actually, sometimes we just do this in a workshop where we use an interactivity tool. For this, we use something called Mentimeter, and you can literally just get people to score where they think they are with regards to those different sustainability impacts. And again, enablers will be different for different organizations. So, this isn't an extensive list. There may be other things that you need to support your strategy. You may need procurement or other types of strategies. This is just a core list here. But it's important to ask yourself, what do you need? How can I make smart, tangible actions and commitments? And this will help you long term. So, don't set targets before having an idea of how you're going to achieve it. Okay, great. So let's look at developing a simple strategy with key goals and commitments. So, this is an example from one of our clients, and these are some of their goals. So, they said they will be a zero avoidable waste organization by 2030. Through a culture of striving to be the best, they'll enable all colleagues and supply chain members to be the best they can be. We aspire to be the trusted partner to improve indoor air quality and well-being. Will leave a lasting positive impact for the communities in which we operate. So you can see their wider goals here have pointed to all elements of sustainability, the environmental side, including kind of waste side of things, and also the people side as well, and the communities in which they impact. So far we've looked at research, looking at what your clients and competitors are doing. We've looked at what's driving you currently and in the future, and we've also looked at key sustainability impacts and enablers. And now let's have a look at creating an action plan. Do we have any questions at this point? I don't think we do have any questions on the chat. Great. Okay, I'll carry on looking at creating an action plan. So you've set yourself the goals, but then you need to create an action plan. So this really is the fundamental piece underneath your key targets and your objectives. This is the how. How are you going to achieve those goals? So if you remember what a sustainability strategy is, it's all about understanding what your sustainability impacts are and how you're managing them. So this is the kind of how you're managing them piece. So let's have a look on the left hand side. You can see we've got a goal. So we'll use an example here. Yeah, let's use the goal of reaching net zero by 2035. That's an ambitious goal, but of course, how are you going to get there? So the next column is a task. So we can break this down into different tasks and subtasks. So first of all, we need to know how much carbon we produce in the first place. We can't manage what we don't measure. So you need to know your current performance, your current baseline, and then you need to understand what carbon you're producing and your emissions. We can then add a subtask here. So a subtask underneath that might be measuring your scope 1, 2, and 3 carbon emissions. You could have another subtask that's collecting information on fuel, expenses, and kind of thinking, who do you need to engage for that? You need to understand your electricity usage, for example, who's responsible for that. And then you have priority. So you need to set a priority level. Is this urgent? Will it impact later tasks? For this example, it would be a high priority because you can't do much else before you've measured your carbon. And then you'll think about resource required. So, who should be involved with this, or what technology or software do you use? And then you can do a RACI matrix. So, this stands for responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed. So, this is a way of breaking down names against certain tasks. So, accountable is someone who's overall held accountable for that goal, responsible is the level below, and kind of is the person that has to actually deliver that action. So they'll need to go to those relevant people or the relevant teams to get the data. Consulted and informed depends on the type of people involved or engaged. So you might have a sustainability group. You need to inform them of what you're doing and kind of keep them regularly updated. And then finally, timescales. So this is really important. So, you'll set a timeline. For example, over the next year, I'm going to collect 1 year's worth of baseline data for my carbon emissions to understand how much carbon I'm producing. And then you need to think about ways to reduce this. So, for example, renewable energy. And so you can start to break this down into discrete, actionable steps to help it seem more manageable. There's also some bullet points on the screen here. So these are things that you need to think about in terms of how you can break down your action plan. And what I'm pulling out here is a key piece on training, education, and engagement. This really forms the continual improvement piece. You could have a fantastic strategy, but if you don't communicate that internally, people don't know what you're doing and the part they should and can play. So this is about empowering people to understand what you're doing, why you're doing it, and what role they can play. And within the supply chain sustainability school, we offer different types of workshops depending on where you're at with your strategy. So you could run a workshop internally with your colleagues to understand where you're at now, where you want to be, and what your priorities are. And this is different to the driver's workshop. This is more about collecting information from different colleagues to understand where you want to be. We run workshops for our clients with their clients. So you can kind of do a workshop with your clients potentially and ask them, what do you want um, to see from your supply chain? How can we help you do that? You can do awareness workshops with your supply chain. So you can let them know what you'll be needing from them. And you can do this after you've developed your strategy and say, this is what we're doing. So be aware that we might be coming to you for more information. And how can, telling them how they can support you on that journey as well. So it's very much about creating that partnership and helping to upskill your supply chain. One thing that I would recommend you think about doing, maybe a training needs analysis. This doesn't have to take a huge amount of time, but it's important to know kind of who needs to know what within your organization. Not everyone needs to know everything. So it's important that the right people know that the right thing. So, for example, if you've got an HR person, um, maybe they're responsible for training. It's important that they understand what influence they can have on setting different types of training, because someone that works on machinery, they won't have time to do a 45-minute e-learning module, for example. So instead, maybe a 5-minute toolbox talk, which we have on the school, would be more applicable. So it's understanding what works best for different job roles and who needs to know what. And you can create a learning pathway in the supply chain school as well for different colleagues. Okay, and then we're coming to the last section here, which is the delivering piece. So, this is monitoring implementation, measuring, managing, and reporting on your performance, and continually improving as well. So you might already be familiar with this plan, do, check, act cycle. You might use it in other areas of your business, but it's exactly the same for sustainability and performance management. So, plan, we've already been through that on kind of how to plan your strategy, who's responsible, how to measure and collect the data. Then you move on to do. So, this is actually doing the work, collecting the data, the measurement piece. And then we move on to check. So, this is understanding how you're performing. So don't wait until the end, as this is technically classed as just reporting. You need to be doing this as you go through month by month or every 6 months or so. Understand how you're performing and managing appropriately there and then. So this is about analyzing your data. And then the final step there is act. So how do you actually make changes based on that? And then of course it goes back round to plan and the cycle starts again. So let's say that you want to roll out some training for your staff, and you plan how to do that. You engage with the right people, maybe external trainers. You set employees a task of completing some learning by a certain date. Um, and then as the months go on, you need to check to see how many people are completing the training. So you don't just want to wait until the end of the year, you want to check month by month. So, for example, if you see that no one has completed the training, you can send email reminders, you can support people to see why it's not working. So, this is the performance management piece. And then at the end of the year, for example, you can gather your data and you can understand how many people overall have completed the training. But you might also want to see the impact that this training has had. So, as an outcome of that, you might send a feedback form around about workplace culture, maybe, and you can ask people about the training that they received, and then you can see how it's made a difference compared to the previous year. And then you can assess, do I need to change anything for the next year, or what went well that I can learn from? And this last part here is all about terminology and language to ensure we're all speaking the same common language when it comes to performance management. You need to understand your baseline in order to improve. So, first of all, we've got a goal. An example of this is reducing the amount of waste being sent to landfill, resulting in environmental and cost benefits. So, this is the overall aim or the desired result. We've then got our target. So this is the specific aim that we're trying to achieve. So for example, 90% waste diverted from landfill. We'll then have the indicator. So this indicates the progress against the target, and we need to use those key metrics there to work out what our indicator is. So we'll need the total waste diverted from landfill and the total waste generated to then give the percentage waste diverted from landfill. And this will help you to understand how you're performing and how you need to improve. And of course, it's just always important that we're speaking the same language when we're using these terms. So don't forget, you need to determine your baseline. You need to understand what baseline you're starting with. You need to establish a reporting frequency. You need to explore tools and resources to support the process as well. Make sure that you define your stakeholders and that you use a common language as well. And the final output for this will be thinking about what things can you do internally that you may want to do externally. So, what can you do with the data that you've got? Of course, you can start reducing, whether that's waste or carbon, but actually further outputs. Do you want to understand, progress reports? Do you want to create working groups or a governance group? Do you want to release a report, which is an external facing report on what you're doing with regards to sustainability. So, we'd recommend that you communicate in some way. As a small business, you don't necessarily need to have a full report, but is there a quick brochure you can put together that communicates your sustainability progress? And as I've already said, it's about understanding where you're currently performing against your target. So you need to understand what your key impacts are, your hotspots, and how you can improve them. So prioritization is so key. If you start trying to do everything, you won't be able to make the most impact. So focus on your hotspots based on the data and use the information you have to make changes to your strategy. Okay, we've got some time now for any questions that anyone might have. I've whizzed through those slides. I appreciate that is a lot of information. Do feel free to use the chat if you have any questions. There aren't any on there at the moment, but here's your final warning to add any questions as we look at what we've covered during this session. So we've looked at what a sustainability strategy is, the terminology associated with a sustainability strategy. We've looked at how to develop a strategy to suit your business, making sure that it's bespoke and you cover all of those steps of the strategy cycle. And we've looked at how to deliver your sustainability strategy, looking at an action plan. So, some key takeaways to think about here: you need to prioritize, you need to develop an action plan, you need to make sure you're measuring your baseline, and you need to make sure that you are training and you are educating colleagues and employees as you go as well. Do we have any questions? There are no questions on the chat. Um, if not, I will wrap up the session and just say thank you so much for listening. I hope you found it useful, and do let us know, get in touch if you have any thoughts. Oh, I can just see a chat from Moffat and Nickel. Great, thank you so much for joining. Um, yes, do let us know. Get in touch if you do have any questions at all. And apologies again that our representative from the US, Wendy, couldn't be here. But I hope you still found that useful. It means we've finished slightly early, but hopefully given you a bit of time left in your day. And we allowed time in case there were a few more questions. But we'll leave it there, I think. And yeah, do have a look on the school at our other resources as well if you'd like to. Thank you for listening, everybody, and maybe see you at another session soon.